If you would, please turn to page 290. On page 290, we read about the community's influence on the child's socialization. And I want to make sure we're clear once more about what socialization is. Socialization is knowledge that the child gains, what the child learns, and the values that the child acquires. Okay? So once more, socialization. The knowledge the child gains, what the child learns, and the values that he or she acquires. Okay, so on page 291, we read about the influence, social contact, and patterns of interaction. Now, I want you to be ready to underline or highlight a part that I'm going to read to you under social contact and patterns of interaction. Okay? So have a pen or a highlighter ready. If you're using a digital version, you can use the highlighting function there. So right under social contact and patterns of interaction, skip to the second statement, which reads, research on crowding and increased social interaction as a result of high-density areas in the 1930s revealed that people were less likely to become agitated, lonely, and tense. Wirth postulated that the overload of social interaction would lead to lessened social relationships, higher levels of personal grief, and increases in personality disorders. I could have just said highlight the whole paragraph. Okay, so now an important question is, how are children socialized based upon how densely populated their community is? So, in other words, how are children who live in crowded neighborhoods socialized? How are children socialized when they grow up in less crowded neighborhoods? Okay, so I'm going to answer this question myself. I believe that children who grow up in highly densely populated areas are socialized is by valuing perhaps interaction with lots and lots of people. Or that child could value alone time in which they get to be alone by themselves. So depending on the child, a child who grows up in a highly populated area may love being around lots and lots of people and interacting with them, or they may really, really desire being alone. They may value that. All right? So that is how children are socialized based upon how highly populated or less populated their community is. All right. So on page 293. Under reported violence. I'm not going to have you highlight the whole paragraph or underline the whole paragraph this time. Just this first sentence. Larger cities report more violence than smaller communities. Okay, so it's obvious why there's more violence in larger cities than in smaller ones. But again, an important question is, how is a child socialized when being raised in a city with a lot of violence? You know, what knowledge do they gain? What do they learn? And what values do they acquire? Okay, that's going to be part 2 of your ICA to answer that question. I'll repeat it. So how are children socialized growing up in communities that have a lot of violence? Okay, so what knowledge do they gain? What do they learn? And what values do they acquire? Okay? On page 294, noise. Noise! That's noise. In the second paragraph, under noise on page 294, we have this sentence. The students who were subjected to chronic aircraft noises had poorer reading comprehension. Okay, that was the result of a study to see whether there was a connection between living in a noisy neighborhood and the ability to read well. So again, they discovered that students who were subjected to a lot of noise, they had poorer reading comprehension. All right, here comes part 3. Part 3, again, is how are children who live in noisy areas socialized? What knowledge do they gain? What do they learn growing up in noisy areas? And what values do they acquire? Okay? And last but not least, on page 295, we see community arrangement. And it reads, the physical design of communities can affect the child and family's physical activities and contact with others. Now this next sentence I have highlighted. Houses arranged all facing one another with sidewalks, front yards, and porches allow for families to spend time in common areas. Okay, so if you have a child who is living in this particular neighborhood, how is that child socialized? What knowledge does that child gain? What does the child learn? What values are acquired? Okay? And that is the last part of the ICA. All right? That's the final part. How is a child who's living in this particular community arrangement socialized? What knowledge does he or she gain? What does he or she learn? And what values does he or she acquire?